Last year, I explored how I discovered I had synesthesia. This means that my senses are blended, and when something happens, it causes one of my senses to activate when it shouldn't. So when I hear music, I form an image of it in my head. This opened up some really interesting conversations with people I knew about how we all think, but one conversation in particular highlighted something particularly unique. One of my oldest and closest friends really couldn't relate to this idea of seeing images in your head. In fact, she talked about how she'd never seen images in her mind at all, not even in memories. Becky and I go way back. We grew up in the same village, we went to the same primary school, we also went to the same secondary school, we studied a lot of the same subjects, and yet we've experienced all that in completely different ways. I've had maps and images and sensory experiences guiding me through all of this, and she's had none of that. We dug deeper and found out that this phenomenon is called aphantasia, and I caught up with Becky to find out more about it.
Look, I didn't know about it at all. Didn't know it was a thing, never heard of it in my life, and my friend sent me a link to a YouTube video with someone asking, do you have aphantasia?
It's thought that an estimated 2 to 3% of people have aphantasia, but because it's not a recognisable everyday term, it's possible that these people go their entire lives without even knowing that it exists. Want to know if you have aphantasia? Take the apple test. Picture an apple in your mind, really see it, its colour and shape. Now look at this image. How vivid was it in your brain from 5 being nothing and 1 being like it was there with you? If you scored a 5, you may have aphantasia.
And I thought, well, there is no apple. There's no apple.
There's no known cure, but many people with aphantasia don't even know they have it. And it's not a barrier to anything. For example, did you know the ex-Pixar chief Ed Catmull is an aphant? It's so interesting to me that we've had lives that are so similar and yet we have experienced them in completely different ways.
I think that the memories I remember the most are ones that I have like actual physical evidence of. If I can't see it in a picture, it basically hasn't happened. Like when you think about your childhood bedroom, I know that it was purple, but it's because there's a picture of it. That's it. That's my only reason I can remember that it's purple, is because I've got a picture of my bedroom.
When you think about the fact that it was purple, you know that you're recalling that from a photograph, but you don't see the photograph in your head.
No, I just know that it's purple, but I can't see the purple. So strangely, I am quite good at remembering faces. I quite often remember faces before I remember names, but again, it's purely memory. Like if you were asking me to draw a person or describe a person's face from memory, I couldn't. But if you brought me that person or showed me a picture of their face, I could tell you exactly who it was.
That's interesting. Maybe you being better at recognising people from seeing their face up front is because, you know, our memories can be changed by like how we felt at the time or our opinion of a person. So sometimes I might remember someone to look slightly different than they did because I have a judgment, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually, because I do remember faces really well, to the point when other folk will say, how do you know them? And I can tell you exactly how I know them, and a lot of people think that's really strange. That makes a lot of sense actually. My dad thinks it's completely bizarre because he said, so when you're reading the Chinese menu, you mean you can't picture what the food looks like? You can't imagine the food? I'm like, no. He's like,
So that's really interesting because my brother asked me, so say I am reading the Chinese menu and do I like imagine what they taste like before I have them? And I went, yeah, of course. It's almost like you're bringing the taste back into your kind of mind/mouth. Do you do anything like that?
No, it's just words. It's just words on a menu. It means nothing until I physically got it. Can you imagine you tasting it? Like you can remember the taste?
Yeah.
I think it explains a lot of my personality. I've always wondered why I couldn't do any art of any sort. Even down to when we were at school, we had to do like your self-portrait, like a drawing of yourself. And I thought that was like the most challenging thing in the world because I don't know what I look like. Even if I was looking in a mirror, it still would confuse me because as soon as I look away, I've forgotten what I just looked at.
Wow. Well, I never thought... Of course, because when you do art, you also have to have an idea of what the end image is going to look like.
Yeah. It's when I talk to you about how you read books that I feel like, oh my God, I'm missing out on so much. So obviously when you say you read a book, you said it plays out in your head like a film. I'm like, wow, it's just me in my head reading a book. Like, it's just me reciting words, but there's no images, there's no main character, there's nothing like that.
Wow. Because you are quite an avid reader, what are your favourite books, and when you think about them, what is it that makes them a good book for you?
A very, very hard question for me, because although I've read a lot of books, I can't remember any of them. I read all the Harry Potters before the films came out, and I remember at the time a lot of people going, oh, that's not how I imagined Hermione. And I remember thinking, what does that mean? Like, that's who she is. Like,
when you were planning your wedding and things like that, like how did you organise that in your mind?
I didn't. I just hoped for the best. That is like, I just wing it through life, and it probably has a lot to do with how I interpret things. I've always just been oh, let's see what happens, because I've never planned ahead. It was entirely last minute, because I basically decorated the room myself.
On the day?
And I didn't, on the day, it was on the day. In the morning, I sent the best men out to get flowers. I didn't know if I needed them until I'd obviously set up with it. I could use some flowers. Purely everything is last minute.
There's something interesting in that though, because they say that people who live in the present are a lot happier than people who worry about what's going to happen in the future, or people who dwell on what's happened in the past. So perhaps by not having that taking up room in your head, it's almost as if your brain has said, this is information that I don't need. And do you think that that's an advantage in a way?
I think so. I don't tend to overthink things, which I think is really nice. If something bad happens, I usually get over it very, very quickly. I was saying that I had an interview earlier in the week, and that night I kept replaying phrases that I'd said over and over in my head. It was just like a constant just narrative of me saying what I'd said over and over again, but that's gone. Like, I can't remember what I said now. I can't remember what the room looked like. I can't remember what the people I seen looked like. Yeah, so yeah, it just fades so fast, so it just doesn't really bother me.
On the surface, it would almost sound like an amnesia, but it's not, because you do still have a complete recollection of your life. It's just that it doesn't come to you visually, and it doesn't stay around to sort of like weigh you down. Do you dream?
Very vividly. It's like watching a film. It's so vivid, like incredibly vivid dreams, which is weird because the minute I'm awake, it all goes. But I've noticed when I start kind of, you know, when you're kind of on the brink between falling asleep, that's when I start to see images, and they come really, really gradually until I'm obviously asleep, and then it's just really, really vivid. But the minute I start waking up again, it just fades.
Within your mind, there's the capacity to imagine something in a visual way. It's just that that's reserved for when you're in, it's almost like a level of activity that your brain goes to when you're falling asleep, and that's when it will kick in. But then when you're awake and cognitive, it's like, we do not need this anymore.
Is it just slowing you down? You don't need this anymore.
I think both Becky and I find advantages and challenges from the way our minds perceive the world. But overall, these discoveries have led me to think in a very broad sense about how every single person's mind works differently. You can take two very similar people and put them through the same lifestyle, but they'll experience it completely differently internally, which inevitably leads to a pretty different external experience for each as well. I think we all have a unique perspective on the world, and now I want to start asking more and more, what does it look like inside your mind? Because we're all different.